whole using floral or arrangements, or using flowers that are in season as opposed to flowers that are not in season?
Well, I mean, this is a question that we get asked a lot, that I personally get asked a lot, and you know, I've been in business for such a long time, and things have changed so much. So, for example, I'd say a short 10 years ago, hydrangea was certainly a seasonal flower, but that's not really the case anymore because it's grown in South America and other places other than where it was grown previously. So I always say that because people would say, all right, well, if you want tulips, you obviously need to get them in the spring, but that's not true. We can get tulips throughout the summer and during the winter. But okay, so here's the flip side. Sometimes they do cost a little bit more based on where they're grown, and sometimes the quality is not really their best. So if a flower is truly in season, you're usually going to come out with a flower that costs less, that's really looks better, holds up better, but I don't think that's as much of a concern as it was at one time. Now, for example, a flower that people ask us about all the time are peony, and peony really are still, even though the season, there's a spring season and then there's also a fall season because they're grown in Chile, they're really not, good ones are not gettable in July and August and early September, so they are still seasonal to maybe 2 times during the year, but years ago it might have been just 1 time during the year. So the seasons are changing and broadening a bit, but it's still a concern. You still want to trust your floral consultant, whoever you're dealing with. They'll really know what's going to be good, and also it's good to have backups. I always say that, you know, sometimes if a flower is one that it's not overly reliable, it's always good to have a backup plan, and I personally like to order double if need be. Alright, so we want a white anemone with a dark center, but that might not be gettable, so what would be our second choice? And let's go ahead and order those in too, and then that way the week of the wedding we're not disappointed and we at least have your first and second choice available for you.
Here's a silly question. Do you take the thorns off the roses when you put them in, if you're just like a long stem arrangement?
You know, many years ago I had a bride that I was meeting with, and she said to me, when you make my bridal bouquet, are you going to remove the thorns? And I kind of laughed, and I was like, yes, of course. And she said, oh, a friend of mine got married about a year ago, and her bridal bouquet, it was an arm bouquet, had all the thorns still on, and she was all cut up and she was bleeding, and I thought to myself, oh my God, you know, what you would think is common sense isn't always common sense. But to answer that question, even when we're designing naturally, we almost always tip the thorns off, which means, when I say tip, just taking the very, very pointy part off. But when you're designing for wedding, everything sharp comes off. And there's some foliages and such that have like almost like little needles. You have to be very careful when you're using those, especially in hand-tied bouquets. But we are very, very aware. No, anything that would be sharp comes off.